And there we go.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We are live from the Pixnub factory. You can see the Pixnub factory right back there. That cool, expensive gaming computer, that's where all the Pixnub stuff actually happens, all the coding on that right there, just in case anybody cares or wants to know. So we've got Alyssa here with us. If you haven't met her before, if this is your first event, she started with Pixnub a couple months ago. So say hi, Alyssa.
Hello.
And then, so to start out, say hi in the chat, say where you're from. We like to see where people are from. Last time we had New Zealand and we had Australia, I think, all the way across the pond over there. Oh, we got Brooke from New Zealand again. So that's cool. We got some Pixnub users all around the world. So it's really cool to see Pixnub being used outside of the States as well. So the first thing to get started,
do we want to do the poll first?
Yeah, I want to do the poll because I know last time the event, there was a lot of information covered. Although it's not incredibly difficult, there is a lot of stuff. So I just want to know how everybody feels their knowledge is from the content that we covered the first session. So if you can put that poll up, Alyssa.
Yeah, it's on now.
And I think UC is about 10 seconds delayed. So the poll's probably not. Oh, some people are starting to click on it here. So anyway, with that said, that poll is going to be up for a while, so feel free to go click on that whenever you want. I want to open it up for questions and answers for the topics we covered in the last session. So if you remember last time, we went over basically how the templates were structured, how everything gets put together when it runs, and we were doing builds one at a time. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And then, it says poll's not showing.
I see like some people responded, so I'm not sure why.
I don't know. We're still pretty new to this webinar. Do you see a red circle on the poll? It shows disabled. It'll show like it's grayed out, but if you click on it, you should be able to see it. So I think it's working. So in any case, if there's any questions, we can answer those now. If not, we'll go straight into the content for today. There's still some attendees trickling in. I'm seeing the numbers going up a little bit. So I didn't want to start on the training right away. Okay, Richard, I see a question. Is there an export setting on Got Photo that I recommend? I'm going to be 100% honest here. I don't use Got Photo, so I cannot answer specific questions about different systems for how their exports work. I do know just from the small amount I've played around with Got Photo, it exports as semicolon delimited, which should work. And I know that it does have a lot of we just had a power bump. I'm hoping we didn't go off the air. Can you still hear me, Alyssa?
Yeah, we're still good.
Okay, so I'm going to point out right now because we had a power bump on my UPS. I heard it click. About 15 minutes before, we lost internet connection for a minute or two. Our Xfinity's terrible here in South Florida. We get power bumps for anything and everything, causes a momentary power bump, and we can lose internet for a minute. So if the stream goes off, just wait around a minute, and then when our internet reconnects, we'll reconnect. But back to the question about Got Photo. I know that they export semicolon delimited files, which should work. They have a lot of the information that you need. You just need to redo the headers, which we discuss in here. And in the second video at the beginning, I go pretty in depth on how to understand the file structure that you need. So you just need to make sure the headers are formatted correctly for that. We have a set section for staff in the class composite. It might be one teacher, but could also be a teacher aide, principal, pastor, but no kids in that section. Can you restrict an area just for any staff, regardless of how many staff? Not really. What could be done is you could have, let's say, 3 or 4 copies of the same design where you modify to where one's got 1 in that area, another folder has got 2 in that area. So it'd be a little more work. And then you'd have to select the correct template for that. But as far as batching, if it had one group that had 2 and another group that had 3, I don't think there would be a way to do that. So you'd have to run them one at a time and use the appropriate template, unfortunately. And GotPhoto does have an export. I'm reading that. We use it exclusively. Yeah, I know GotPhoto's got an export. It's not going to export with the Pixnub headers, but it's pretty easy to format those. I know for the SPA plugin, Carl Bott has released an export, a program that converts to SPA. I don't know if he's worked on one for EasyComp yet. Maybe I'll hit him up about that. Not faculty only. I'm talking about a class composite, but need a separate area in the class composite. Well, to answer your question, Chris, yes, I'm going to do a screen share real quick, and I'll just kind of see if this is what you're talking about here. Can you see my screen, Alyssa?
Yes, I just made it full screen.
Okay, so something like this, where there's an area, in this case, there's a teacher and a principal and a logo. Yeah, you can make an area that's got 2, 3, 4, whatever you want. And in this case, this is slot 1 for where you see the teacher, and where you see the principal is slot 2, but it could be 3 or 4. But you would need a separate copy of that template, I think, if you needed one that was for 2 or 3 or 4. Unless, let me think about this. I think it would have to be that way. So in any case, I don't want to spend too much time, but I think you would have to have multiple templates for that. I love the window in the window. Quick question on setting up scratch disk in Photoshop. When going to edit preferences, it's only showing the local drive and doesn't allow us to change the location or add a new one. I probably can't answer that without being on your system, but I know that you cannot use a network drive for a scratch disk. If you're on a Mac, the hard drive has to be formatted in the Mac formatting. You can't use like a exFAT or a FAT32 or an NFTS Windows format. It has to be in the Mac journalized format. So maybe that's why it's not showing up. But that's a Photoshop specific thing, really not a Pixnub specific thing. If you post in the Facebook group, maybe we can discuss it more. Does the CSV handle the caption? Yes, if the template is set up for that. So on that template where you see the text layer below, that's a separate text item that's attached to the slot. We'll go over that in session 3. Actually, that's on January 3rd, where we go over the layout designer. It has to be built into the template design. that one that I have on the website is already built with that. If you're making your own, you'll have to create that. Most of the Pixnub ones that I have don't have that. I think that's the only one I actually have that on there. But like I say, we'll go in depth on January 3rd on that discussion. And if you want that information before then, I do have some tutorials on that. Okay, so I see Elise says about the scratch disk, yours is an external drive. You can use an external drive for scratch disk, but what I'm saying is I don't believe that Photoshop will allow you to use a network drive. So I don't think you can use like an NAS drive or something to that effect. I might be wrong, but I think that's the case. So in any case, we got 2 fairly long videos. They're about 20 minutes each. Some of that time is just the computer running, building the batch. I didn't want to speed that up because I want you guys to be able to follow along. I didn't want to get ahead of where you're at. So if you guys want to follow along, if you haven't already downloaded, there is the download link in the chat that has the downloads that you can follow along with. It's got all the files that I use. If you downloaded last night when I first posted on the Facebook group, go download again, because after I posted that, I was making these videos and I realized I had to make a couple updates to the files. So if this video gets glitchy, let us know, because I noticed we were streaming, or we had 720p videos, which the webinar recommended, which I thought was too fuzzy when I looked at the playback. So we're going with 1080 videos here. I'm hoping that Webinar Jam can handle them and stream them well enough. If they're glitchy, we've also got 720 versions we can try as well. Or I can go live in Photoshop and do stuff. So go ahead and play that first video, Alyssa, and then after that video, we'll have Q&A about that.
Yep, let's do it.
And if you have any other questions, if you ask during the video. Hello, everyone, and welcome.
Sorry.
That's okay. If you have any other questions during the video, you can ask, and I'll answer questions during the video. So you can go ahead and play that again.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Easy Composites training webinar. Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Easy Composites training webinar. In this session, we're going to be discussing batch processing, and that is actually pretty easy to do with Easy Composites. As long as you understand how the data sheets need filled out, then it's pretty simple to batch process. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run a batch process for 3 class composites, and then we'll talk about what it did. You can follow along with the training files that I put in the link to the chat in the webinar. So if you've downloaded those and unzip that folder, then you can use those files to follow along with me. And I'll try to go slow enough so that you can keep up. So we'll just need to select the items for the batch process. And so first I'll select the student images. So under that AI sample images folder, we'll select the one that's called combined. Then we'll need to select the template folder. So the sample class composite template folder is where it's at. And make sure you're selecting the folder underneath that called template files. And then you'll need to make sure you click this batch mode on here. And once that's on, you'll see another button for the save folder. So you'll need to make a folder somewhere. I've got one on my desktop. You can put it wherever you want, but then just select that folder. And we will load in the data file. In the download, it comes with a data file that's already set up. I'm not going to discuss this until after we're done running this quick batch, but that's the file we will select here. Then it's under the CSV data files folder in that download. Go ahead and select that. And we might as well customize this with what we learned from yesterday's lesson. So I'll go ahead and select a background image from that download folder here. And we'll use that same blue gradient background that we used in yesterday's lesson. And then I've already selected some here, but I'll show you what I'm going to select. So if you want to follow along with the exact settings, I'm just going to use beveled corners and then custom 3 for the styles for all 3 of them, which is the yellow color. That should be all we need. So I'm just going to hit build composites here. And you can see it's brought in that blue gradient and it's building the composites now. This will take about a minute for this computer. Your computer may be a little faster or a little slower depending on the speed of your computer. All right, that took just over a minute here. I'm going to go ahead and open the files. Your computer may not be done yet, but that's okay. We'll talk about this for a minute here and let your computer catch up if you're not. So you see that it's built all 3 of these composites here. And you can see it's brought in all of the text. And it's also brought in the logo here, and it's brought in those custom styles for the yellow color, the yellow border, and the bevel that we selected. So really, if your data file is set up, you can just run. And we just did 3 here, but you could do 50. It really doesn't matter. You can do as many as you want as long as your data file is set up properly. I'll point out one more thing too that it did. That's kind of subtle, but if you look at the graphics, you can see that this it realigned the graphics to match the template opening. We discussed that in yesterday's webinar, so I won't get into that too much. And if we had used that template where we had even 2 rows, and would have brought that down more to match the spacing as well. But pretty much everything is done. So let's get in and talk about what it actually did here. So in the data file, this is the sample file that had the data that was needed for this run, but it's going to vary depending on what you are doing. You might need fewer columns or more columns. So you only need to set up the columns that you need for your specific batch. The only thing it actually needs to run is the first column. And that first column in cell A1 has to read easy comp with all capital letters. And this is the column that contains the image file names. If it only has this one column, it's going to take all the images in that column and build a composite with all of those images on a single composite. So what that could be useful for is, let's say you have a folder of 1,000 images and you might want to build one composite with, 40 or 50 images. You could create a 1-column CSV with just those images, and it would build a composite with just those images. Now, I'll point out one more thing too. If you remember from yesterday that we had the files named by last underscore first, and we did that so that way we could pull in the student name based on the file name. If you're using a CSV, you don't need that. It could be just the image name straight off your camera, like img_0001.jpg. It doesn't need the name here, and it's not even going to use the name in your file name if you're using a data file. It's going to get the name from the first name and last name column. Now, I mentioned that you only need one column to run, but if you only had one column, it's not going to import your text. It's actually going to hide those text layers. So normally you'll have in a data file at least these 3 columns. So the first and last name is what it uses to import the name that you see here. And then it's going to sort the data by last name and then by first name for the order in which it puts these students into the template. So you can see here that, let's find one that's got an A for a name. So we got Anderson, Black, Bryant, Carter. So you've seen us put the last names in alphabetical order. Then if there was 2 students with the same last name, it would then go by first name for the order. With the exception, it put the teacher here to the first slot. How it was able to accomplish that is with the force order column. Now, if you remember from yesterday, we talked about if you're not using a data sheet, then it will sort by the file name, and you can put that number in front of their name. It's not going to use that if you are running with a data file. So if you have a number in front of their name, or in front of the file name, that's not going to do anything for the sorting unless you're using this option, the data mode file names option. That's the only time that it will use this number in front of the file name. If you're using a data file, in order to force the order, you have to use this force order column. Normally, you're just going to want to force something to the front. So you put a number 1 for whatever image you want to force to the first slot. And it doesn't have to be the first one in the order of the data sheet. It could be anywhere in the data sheet. So if you put a 1 right here, and this is your class, then this image gets forced to the first slot. Everything else it then sorts by last name and then first name. You could put multiple. You could put a 1 and then a 2 and force 1 to the first slot and then the second slot. I will point out, though, that you cannot skip slots. So you can't just force 1 into slot 5, for example, unless there's something in 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the reason why is because it's just performing a sorting function. It's not actually looking at that number and correlating it to an actual slot. So it's going to sort the data by the force order column, then the last name column, and then the first name column. The other thing you can do is if you want to force something to the back, you could put 10,001 and like 10,002, for example, and it would sort this one to the back and this one next to the end, the next one over. It's got to be numbers greater than 10,000. And the technical reason is because when it imports the data, if there's nothing in there, it imports it as 10,000. And so since it would import all the blanks as 10,000, those essentially then don't get sorted and it goes to last and then first. I'm not going to get into all that technical stuff really on this, but just know that put 1 if you want the teacher to go to the front or a student to go in a feature slot. You could put 1 and they would go to the front. Okay, so moving on, these next columns here, these are group text columns, and these are the columns that are being used here to replace the text for the group headers. So this text, for instance, where it says Challenger Elementary School, and then Miss Walker second grade and 2425. Now, it's going to use that text exactly as it is written in your sheet or typed in your sheet. So for example, if you wanted one text item to be a combination of a teacher name and then a grade, like Mrs. Jang hyphen kindergarten as example, or Mrs. Walker hyphen second grade, that has to go into a cell combined exactly like you want it to go in the template. So if you're getting the data from your school and you may have grade here and you may have a teacher in a column, if you want those together in a text item, you're going to have to do your spreadsheet magic to concatenate the cells or however you do it to combine those to get those into a column like that. And I specifically did it for the webinar this way so I could just mention that. That's why I specifically set it up this way. So these headers, there are more available headers you can use than just what you see here in this particular spreadsheet, which we'll get into in a minute. But whatever the headers are, those are the text layers that it's looking for. So for example, school name. Let me open the actual template file. So it's going to get those headers from the graphics file. Notice when I saved that file, I actually left this red line on. That'll get hidden when it runs. But anyway, just to point out, if you see the file when you open it and it's got that showing there, that wasn't supposed to be. But nonetheless, it's going to look for example, school name. It's going to look for a layer called school name. And in this template, there's a school name hyphen RM. Now, if you're familiar with the Sports Photo Automation plugin, you'll know that there is auto resizing, and it works the exact same way in Easy Composites. If you have hyphen R or hyphen RM at the end of the text item name, that's going to designate automatic resizing. So hyphen RM is resize maximum. That means if the text is longer or wider than the width of the text in the template, it's going to scale it down. If it's shorter, it's not going to mess with it. If it was hyphen R, and that's resize mode, and it always resizes. So if it's too short, it stretches it. If it's too long, it condenses it. So RM is a very typical mode you'll use, and if it's got nothing here, if it just has the text name, then it's not going to do any resizing. All right, now in the data sheet, you don't put that hyphen RM, so you don't want to do this because it's not going to use it in the data sheet if it's this way. And the reason why is because you might have different templates that use different resizing modes. So it wouldn't make sense to set it up in the template to enter that. So the way it's set up here, this will work with any template, regardless of whether it's using a resize mode or not, it will work with it. So just leave that hyphen R or hyphen RM off in the data sheet. So it's the same. You got this group text 1, and it's going to look for this group text 1 layer. And then you got your teacher layer and your year layer, and that's where it's getting these other 2 text items to replace the text. All right, and the last 2 things, this YB group text actually is not being used, and the YB group ID is not being used for that batch process we just did. Those are yearbook items, which I'll get into in the next video. So this one data sheet we've got will work with class composites or yearbooks. It is using the group ID. Whenever you batch process, it's going to group the images by whatever is in this group ID column. So anything with the exact same text get grouped together. It doesn't have to say a teacher's name. You could put in anything in here. You could put in a number. It could be, let's say you want just wanted the number. You could put 1 all the way down, and it would group all of these into the same composite. Now it's usually easiest to use teacher name, but for the case where you might have 2 teachers with the same name, you would have to put like something on the end of the name to be able to differentiate between the 2 teachers. So you could have a _1 and an _2. So, but normally you can just use the teacher's name for the group ID column. And the last thing is this column called logo file. Now this is completely optional whether you want to use a logo, but if you do want to automatically import a logo into your template, then the template first has to be set up for a logo. And this one is, there's this logo setup layer. I've got a video. I'm not going to do all that in this training webinar, but I've got a video on that. It's basically you click a button and it adds this logo area, and you scale and move that where you want, and then it will import your logo into that smart object, and you save it in your graphics file in your template. Now the logos, if you're doing this, they've got to be in a subfolder underneath your, I'll just show you here. So in the folder that contains all of your images, you need a folder, it's all lowercase, just called logos. And then in that folder, you put your logos that you're going to use, and that's the folder it's going to look at for which logo to import, and whatever is in your spreadsheet. So in this example, I used 3 different. I used bulldog.wepi, seahawk.wepi, and tiger.wepi. So generally your logos are going to have transparent backgrounds, so you'll use a ping, a TIFF, or a wepi, or it's webp, but pronounced wepi. But in any case, you'll use one of those 3 formats for images with transparency. And usually for a whole school, you're just going to use the same logo. I just did 3 for this demo just to do it. All right, I think that about, oh no, it doesn't cover everything. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about. Now we just did a demonstration with a batch process. However, if we wanted to use that same data sheet and run one image at a time, it works exactly the same way. So you import that data sheet the same way and just don't select your batch mode. Then when you go to build your composite, it's going to give you the group ID options from your spreadsheet. So we could just run one of them. So we can also say combine all groups, so bring everything in as one big group, but we could just select the one we want, and then it's going to build us just that class, and it's not going to save it. It's going to leave it open for us to edit. So really handy if you just need to build 1 or 2 and you have a data sheet ready. And again, it's imported the logo and the text and the names and everything exactly the same as it would if it was batching, other than it's 1 at a time. Anyway, we're going to go to question and answers now. And then I'll answer anything and go into Photoshop Live and try to explain anything more if you have questions. And then after that, we'll come in and do the yearbook, which is going to be a lot simpler than this demonstration because the yearbook is almost identical to. All right, I know that was a long video, but there was a lot of information to cover. Hopefully it wasn't too complicated. So there was one question during the forum I'll answer now, or during the video. It was asking about the numbers as far as the sorting. So basically it just runs a sorting function on those numbers, and the smallest numbers go to the first slots and the largest numbers go to the last slots. Anything you force to the end, you got to start with 10,001 and greater. So if you have 10,001, 2, and 3, 10,003 would be the very last slot. If there's any other questions, please ask them now. Although you guys are about 10 or 15 seconds delayed behind us, so you're probably just getting finished with the video as I'm talking here. So. Not seeing any questions pop up. Oh, I will point out too that since we did have a couple people ask this after the last webinar, Alyssa made a really cool template design with some hand-drawn little fun chalkboardy like designs. And we said we put an offer in it, but we didn't actually put the offer in that until about the end of the webinar because I didn't know how to operate Webinar Jam. I thought I did. I didn't. So if you, on the right side, there's a little offers thing. If you click on that, there's a template that she made that's half price right now through today, actually. So just as FYI. Oh,
we got one question now.
Could I show how to add the caption column, please? I suppose I will do a quick demonstration. Why not? This is going to be very brief, though. There's a video that explains this in more detail, but I'll turn my screen share on. Then let's go into Photoshop. So in Easy Composites, there is the layout designer, and you've got 3 options for your text layers. First, comma, last puts 2 text items with the first name and the last name on top of each other. Full name puts the full name into 1 text item. Full name, comma, text will give you the full name on the top and then an additional text item below. And that's what it needs to be if you want to automate and add that text in there. So you got to create the, I'm going to go over this layout designer fully in the next webinar session, but you have to create it with that. And then in your data sheet, you'd have to use this header called text. And that would be where it's pulling the text in from. If you want to add it to an existing to an existing data sheet, or an existing template. So the problem with an existing template is there's really not room for it, and it's not going to move around smart objects. And usually there's not any room to put that second text item. So you would have to add the additional text item manually, but then you'd also have to rescale and move all of your smart objects around, which is a lot more of a pain than just going into the layout designer, because this is really quick to set up and run and create a layout with. But we'll be discussing this, like I say, in the next session. But do go watch those videos on the Pixnub website because we've got those there as well, or that training for that as well there. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. So I suppose we'll go into the second video. This video is going to cover how to know which headers you need and how to know what headers are available and how the data sheet needs to be structured. And then we're going to go into yearbook, how to create a complete mug book with just a few clicks. It's pretty much the same as batch processing. So go ahead and play the video, Alyssa, and then feel free to ask questions again during the video.
All right, let's get started.
In this lesson, I'm going to be discussing two topics. And the first is just a continuation of the first lesson that we did. The video is running kind of long, so I stopped that a bit early for Q&A. But that topic that I still need to finish up is for how you know which data items need to be put into the CSV file and how that CSV file needs structured. This is a pretty common question people have, is they don't understand how their data file needs structured. Before we look at the actual data file itself, or this data file starter here, on the website, I just want to show you that under the tutorials, if you go to Easy Composites and to the data file, written documentation, everything about the data file for how it needs structured, what all the headers do, everything is listed here. So refer back to this if you have any questions, because everything is in there. I think a lot of people don't know this page actually exists. Now, if you just want to quickly see a list of available headers that you have to use, if you click, now you got to be on the home menu. So if you're on the Build Composites area, if you click the home menu, if you go to the data file starter, this will allow you to create pretty much an empty data file, but that will be structured in the structure you need. Now, Pixnub is not going to rearrange or organize your data. It's not a data collection system. Pixnub is meant to just batch process the images, but it is up to you to get the data into the proper format that Easy Composites needs. So I'm not going to be going over that because there's too many systems for how people collect data. I mean, there's literally dozens and dozens of systems that people can use. So that's really on your end to do. Now, when you first come in here, everything is going to be unchecked. This will show you all of the available columns that you can choose, or the headers that you can choose from. The only thing that it's not going to show is this first column for Easy Comp and then the first name and last name. You're not going to see selections for those. And that is because those are always created when you run this. Those are just default columns that always get made. However, there is a checkbox, Get Names from File Names. If you click this and your file names are set up with last name, then underscore first name, it's going to automatically import that information from the file name, and it's going to populate the cells with the first and last name. It has to be last name, then an underscore, then the first name. You can have an underscore after the first name and stuff after that, and it will ignore that. But it has to be, the file has to start out last underscore first. Now, everything else beyond those three columns will import empty, but it will show you the structure that your data needs to be in. So how do you know which data headers you need? I mean, it really depends on your template setup and what you are doing with your template. So in the case of this template, and I know that if I'm going to batch process class composites, I'll need the group ID. That's how it groups the class composites. If I'm going to create yearbooks, I'll need a yearbook group ID. That's the YB group ID. That's how it groups the images for the order it puts them into the yearbook. For if you're grouping by grade or whatever it is you're grouping by, you need this column. if you're going to force the order of the images, like for example, you're putting the teacher in the first slot, you'll need the force order column. This top section is all your image level items. And so the text, that's referring to a separate text layer that's underneath the student name. This template doesn't have that, so I'm not going to check that. This next section is group level text headers. Now these are for the text that is not assigned to specific image slots, all the text that is group specific. So the school name is the same for the entire group. So these are the text items that are in the graphics file under the image overlay. So I can't maximize it here because this window is open, but those are those text items that are contained there. And you remember from that last lesson, this one, I think we had a teacher and a year, school name, group text 1. There also was the grade in there, although the text item itself didn't use that, but that was in there. And then for the yearbook, we'll have a YB group text that's specific to the yearbook. You can create your data file to work with yearbooks and class composites. Any columns that aren't used for the batch that you're running just get ignored anyway. And then the last thing that this template did, remember we had that logo file, so you'll click that. There are other items here, but most of the time you're not going to use any of these. Just a brief explanation. The hide show layer checkboxes, these are meant for if you want to have specific layers in your template that it shows and hides. For instance, in your background folder, you can have it to where you can click, if you click show layer 1, for instance, you have a layer called red. You could put that in your template in the cell and it would show that layer to change the background color. I'm going to have a series of videos on these two sections. I'm really not going to cover it in this lesson though. I'll just briefly mention, and the action items, those you can run custom Photoshop actions. So after it builds the template, you can further customize the template dynamically through Photoshop actions, similar to what the SPA plugin can do. But again, I won't really go into it here. So I'm going to create the data file, and then it's going to pop up a folder selection window, and you will just go into the folder that contains your images that you're creating the CSV data for. Before I do this, I'm going to hit cancel one more time. Go back into that data file. So I forgot to mention the delimiter. You can use a comma, tab, semicolon, or colon. You can use CSV, TXT, or TSV file extensions. As far as Easy Composites is concerned, it treats all of these files the same, and it automatically determines your delimiter. So any of these will work the same. However, if your data has commas in it, for example, if you have commas in your file name, sometimes I see people put like a comma between the first and last name and the file name. If you have that, you cannot use a comma delimiter. Easy Composites cannot handle it. Even though Excel can, Easy Composites can't. I'm not going to get into the details there, but if you do have commas in your data, just use a semicolon is the one I recommend, and then it will work with commas in your data. Okay, I'm going to hit create data, and then I will go to the folder that has the images, and that combined folder, and you hit open, but it doesn't actually open it. It just creates the data file. So if I go into open that file now, You can see it's created this file and all of the cells are blank as mentioned. However, it did import those names because I used that checkbox, but it's created that CSV file for us. And then you can see the data structure. I will point out too that these columns don't have to be in any specific order other than the first column. For easy comp, that has to be the first column. Anything else can be rearranged. So if you are getting data from your school and the columns that you need are in a different order, you can leave them there, but you can use this as a guide for how the columns need to be named. That's the important thing. Just make sure the columns get the correct name. And then, last thing about data files too, and go back into my spreadsheet program here. When you're saving a data file, and this is very important, make sure that you're using the character set Unicode UTF-8. If you're not using this and it defaults to like Western Europe or something, which sometimes happens, it won't be able to import special characters like your characters with the Spanish accent marks. Those will not import because it has to be UTF-8 for the JavaScript to be able to import those into the Photoshop plugins platform. So I think that about covers what I wanted to discuss with the data sheets. Now let's get into the creating a yearbook. So the yearbook is more or less identical to class composites with just a couple of key differences. I'm going to just open the template here, and in the download you've got this template as well. Creating documents, so there is a yearbook template folder. Okay, so this folder comes with, or this template comes with 6 folders. These are actually 6 separate templates. I'm just going to open one of them here. So let's do the 6x5 with group headers is what that folder is called. You see that there's only 3 files in the yearbook. And this is different than how class composites work. The graphics file works exactly the same as class composites. Let me view this as a list so you can see the names here. Now for your layout files, they're similar to the class composites layouts, except you only need one of them. You have the option for 2, and they have to be named differently. So for class, let me get back to the Finder here. Didn't actually mean to open that. Let me just get back there. Probably have that window open somewhere, but okay, so with the class composites, the files have to be just named easycomp hyphen, and then the extension for the number of images. The names for the yearbooks end the same way with that easycomp hyphen, like 027 in this case. But when you're running yearbook mode, it's going to look for some additional text in the end of your file names. So those names are YB hyphen main hyphen easycomp hyphen then the number of images. This one is needed, the one that's the YB main. That file is the main page for your yearbook, and this one contains 30 images. And if that's the only file you have, it'll use that for every page of the yearbook. There's another file called YB first, and If that one is there, it'll use that for the first page for each group and then use the main page for each additional page of the group. Let me open both of these here. So if you have a YB first, this will be the first page for like each grade. For example, if you're grouping by grade, then each additional page for that grade will go on to this page, which has no header, and it will keep filling pages until that group is complete. The other thing I'll mention here, and we'll run a quick demo here in a second, but the other thing I'll mention is for your this header text, although the graphics files work the same, the exception is if you're going to run a group header for your group, and this you want to use the YB group text header, but you're going to put that text layer needs to be in the layout file, not the graphics file. So that's one thing that is different than class composites, and it'll be in the YB first layout file. And the reason why that is if you put this in the graphics file here, if you put it in here, what's going to happen is it's going to try to put that text in for every page, and you don't want it for every page. So because of that, it only goes in this first page here, the one that says YB first. Anyway, I think this will make a little more sense when we batch process. And the last thing I'll point out before we do that, though, is why can I not open that? Okay, so in our spreadsheet, remember I talked earlier about the group ID is how it groups the images for your class composites. You've got the YB group ID for grouping the images for your yearbook. The reason there's two of them is because you may group the images differently. So class composites, you're grouping by teacher here or by class. Your yearbook, in this run we're going to do, I group them by faculty and students. So all the faculties go in their own group, and then all the students in the whole school go on to their group. And you could set these up by grade as well, but since there's only 3 classes and there's not many students here, there's only actually 3 faculty, I just did it faculty and students. But we'll run this demo here. So on build composites, instead of selecting batch mode, you select yearbook mode. It'll give you this message that the recenter bottom row has been turned off. That's this button. You can check it back on if you want, but usually you want to leave that off for yearbooks because you usually don't center that bottom row in yearbooks. And then for your grouping, when you go to yearbook mode, the default goes to that YB group ID, which is this column. You can actually, if you want, it allows you to select group ID from the grouping, and then or none. If you select group ID, it'll go by obviously this column. If you select none, it's not going to do any grouping. It's just going to order by last name and then by first, and put them all into one continuous mugbook. All right, there's something here around here. Oh, before we do that, I forgot. We got to change the template. So let's grab that yearbook template. I'll use the 6x5 grid with group header. And then background in that download, there is yearbook sample backgrounds. I'll just select the purple. I'll go ahead and leave the yellow styles with the beveled corners. That'll be fine. think that should be it. So let me hit build. Then it's going to ask you for a name. It will create an additional subfolder with whatever name you put in here. And this will be the name of each individual page as well. And it will put a page number at the end of each one. This should only take about a minute, same as it did for the class composites here with the same number of students. Right, so let me open those yearbook pages so we can look at them. You can see it's made us yearbook test page 1, 2, and 3. Now page 1, there's only 3 on there because remember, I grouped that one group by faculty and there was only 3 images. I mean, typically you'd have more than 3 teachers, but what it does is when it gets to the end of a group, it's going to start a new page. So in this case, we went to students and it put the header text based on this YB group text. So it put this text that says students for the students and faculty for the faculty. And then when it moves to page 3, it gets to the end of this page and there's still more students. And it starts a new page until it gets to the end. And if there was more pages, it would just keep on going until it got to a new group. The only last thing to point out is these groups, it puts your pages, or it orders the groups alphanumerically for how it lays the pages out, which is important. For example, if you're going to group by grade, you just have to keep this in mind. Let's say, no, that's not what I want, not YB group text, YB group ID. So let's say we were wanting to order the yearbook by grade. Now, it doesn't matter what order your spreadsheet comes in. Easy Composites reorders anyway, because it's going to, of course, sort by last name and then by first. And then when it groups, it's going to reorder everything as well. But it's going to set everything alphanumerically in the order it puts the groups. So with the first through the 5th grade or 6th grade or whatever, those automatically get put in order because of the number in front. Unless you're using text, unless you're spelling out first and second. But in the case of this, it would put 1st grade or 2nd grade first and then 5th grade, then it would put kindergarten because that comes after the number alphanumerically. So what you'd have to do, if you wanted kindergarten to go in the front, put in 0-kindergarten. And that would force those to the front of the order. And then if you're doing faculty, you could maybe do 01-kinder or 01-faculty, 02-kindergarten, or F comes before K. So you could just put 0 faculty. In any case, you just got to be mindful that it's going to sort these alphanumerically. That way your pages sort correctly. In worst case, it would just put the wrong number on your page, and when you made a PDF, you'd have to resort those yourself if you didn't have this part correct. Anyway, I know this video drug on pretty long. I think that about covers it. for what we wanted to discuss. So let's go to Q&A now. And if you have any questions about any of these topics we discussed, I'll be happy to answer, and then go in live into Photoshop if needed and discuss anything that we need to answer in Photoshop. Okay, I'm just going to go over a couple of the questions that were from the Q&A. So Elise asked about special characters in her file names messing up. I don't know if the file names weren't importing or it wasn't putting the text in correctly. I didn't quite understand which she was talking about, but I'm pretty sure that's probably a UTF-8 thing. If your files or your CSV doesn't get saved with the UTF-8 character set, any of the special characters, it can mess up different things for how it's processing, whether it be the text import or the file name import. And so the question that Jim asked about, can you have two logos? Yes, but not with the automated template setup. Yet you have to kind of trick it by using the student slots. If you're interested in wanting to know that, for anybody who wasn't reading the chat, you can go read the chat and see my comments there. Jim, yearbook, is there a left-right page template? No, but there probably will be this option. I didn't get that done yet on the initial release of Easy Composites 3. It was a lot more complicated to make. It is something I have on my list. So what I'll probably do is have it set up to where, if you remember in the yearbook files, there was a header and a main page. I'll probably have it set up to where there's a option for it to be able to alternate pages. So it'll end up having to be, you'll have to have 4 files. You'll have to have a header left and a header right, and then a main left and a main right. And depending on if the header starts on a left page or a right page, it gets a little confusing, but it is on my radar, and it would be something that you would have to set up the templates, of course, to be able to handle that. And my thought is to have it all driven purely on the template side with the naming of those files, so the user doesn't have to click anything to make it happen. It just sees the layer names in the design and automatically alternates if those are set up. That's just my thoughts. I don't know yet. It won't be in the next month or two. It'll be sometime after SPAC. So I would say like March maybe or something. Okay, oh, I see Elise said it was saved as UTF. I don't know. So if you want to send me that data file, I can look at, but can you please clarify what the issue was? Was it not seeing those files and not adding them to the template, or was it importing the text into the template correctly, but still adding the images? I was a little confused about the question on that. So yes, Elise, just send me that file with the that information. I can see what happens when I import it and try to replicate it. There could be some other thing going on, or it wasn't adding the files. I mean, yeah, there could be a name mismatch. What I will say, if it's ever not adding the files, what you want to do, and so Elise, this is what I want you to actually do before you send me those files. Go to that data file starter that we discussed and create a CSV from the data file starter. So allow the data file starter to add those file names into column A, and then see if that works. Because if your data sheet was not created with the data file starter, maybe there was some kind of character mismatch. So I don't know, but if the data file starter, if that file works and the one you're using doesn't work, then that's probably the case. If adding it from the data file starter, or if using the data file starter to create your CSV and that doesn't work with those file names, and there's something else going on. So test that first, and then just send me an email with some feedback to let me know if that worked, and then send me the CSV and a couple files if it didn't. All right, any other questions here? I think we pretty much answered all of the questions. Thank you for those who stuck it out through the whole thing. I know this was very long, but there is a lot of stuff in this plugin to be able to do this full automation, although it's not difficult, even though there is a lot of stuff in there. It's not that hard once you start using it. And once you learn it, you'll be able to automate entire schools for all your composites, automate your mug books with a few clicks. It's really, really not that hard. So I'm going to post this on YouTube probably later tonight so you can review this. You'll still have those test files to go over and go through the YouTube video again and test it out in Photoshop. And if you have any further questions, just go ahead and post in the Facebook group or in the forum, tech support forum on the website. So one last check. I don't see any more questions. So thank you guys. We're out of here, and have a Merry Christmas.